Greetings. Today I would like to do a sort of first look / overview of the Audioroot BC1150. This is a battery combiner, hence the BC. So as you can see inside, slots for up to 6 batteries. And it is mounted or built into a Pelican 1150 case, hence the name. If you saw my last video, it was about 6 weeks ago. I was looking at the new Audioroot eSMART Trio battery distributor, which has been fantastic and is currently what's powering my recorder bag at the moment, so I'm down on the floor in use. Can't really pull it up to show it. But that eSMART Trio has clearly got some of its roots in this BC1150. And the BC1150, I don't know when it actually started shipping. It was announced at least like about 18 months ago at this point. And both of them can function as battery combiners. The eSMART Trio up to 3 batteries or 2 batteries plus a priority port. And this does a priority port as well. We'll get to that in a bit. And the way it combines the battery readings over the eSMART protocol bus to the consumer device, like Sound Devices 8 series or whatever, behaves exactly the same. When I connect this directly to my Scorpio, or I connect the eSMART Trio to the Scorpio, they're doing the same thing. So what have we got here? Well, first, as I said, you can put up to 6 batteries in this, and I'll get into the economics of this in a little bit later in the video. I happen to own a total of 5 of these 96 watt eSMART batteries. I've got 2 of them in the sound bag going into the eSMART Trio at the moment. That gets my Scorpio. I do most of my recording from Dante rather than actually connecting devices directly to it, so I'm not running phantom power on the Scorpio. And I get, I don't know, maybe about 8.5 hours from 2 fully charged eSMARTs, which is actually pretty good, right? That gets you through most days. This, you can have up to 6. On the eSMART Trio, if you didn't see my other video, the 3rd port, I have the AC adapter that came with the Scorpio plugged into the priority port so that if I have shore power available, I can just plug it in and then it just runs everything, right? Which is, like I say, it's been really great. With this device, you can have up to 6 batteries. If you have the 96 watt hours like this, that means a total of 576, right? Watt hours. If you use the 98s, it's like 588 watt hours. Let's just call it 600 watt hours to make it nice and round, right? These batteries are, when I got them, they were 180. I think they currently are listing on most websites for 200 at the moment. But, you know, let's call it 200, right? And then the case itself, the BC1150, is $1,000. And so that means that with 6 batteries, you're looking at about $2,200 total for a 600 watt hour, essentially block battery. If you look at things like the Maverick from Core SWX, that's 680 watt hours, something like that. Call it 700, and that's $4,200. It's almost twice as much. And they now have their Renegade line, which, you know, yes, you can get the Renegade XL, which is 1,200 watt hours or something like that, 1,400 watt hours. I forget which exactly. And that's like almost $5,000. So this allows you to use smart batteries that you might already own, and therefore you're not buying any new, to combine them into a big block battery that can be used to power a power-hungry cart, or, as I'll show in a moment, a camera system as well. So it gives you a bunch of flexibility. The other advantage is that because these batteries are all individual batteries, if you have to fly with all the restrictions on lithium batteries these days, you could take the batteries out, you have the batteries individually, and be able to fly. Whereas with like that Renegade XL, there's no way you can fly with that because it's way over the 100 watt hours that airlines allow, or TSA, or whoever, right? The other thing too, when you are thinking about, say, a camera, you take traditional camera. This happens to be gold mount. I use gold mount. I know a lot of people use V mount, but same thing. You look at the price of these, they're basically the same for both the gold and the V mount, right? These two batteries are the same energy, right? This is a 96 watt hour. I think this is 98 watt hours. And they're both 14.4 volts nominal, right? So they basically have the same energy. And what you can kind of see is, the eSMART battery is basically doing a row of batteries and a row of batteries, whereas with the block, the gold mount battery, it's more like row of batteries and then a row of batteries on top of that, right? And you have some other conveniences, like, you've got an actual USB and a D-tap out directly on this, which you don't have on the eSMART. You've got a little display that gives you a readout on the status of the battery, which the Audioroots also have, at least the Audioroots version of the Neo versions. And, this is a little bit chunkier in size, partly because of the gold mount and designed for mounting onto the camera and, not falling off, right? But they're roughly the same weight. This is a little bit heavier, but not significantly so. But there's a big difference in price. This is a $600 battery, and this is a $200 battery. Even if you go with some of the less expensive ones, like you look at a Core SWX, their 100 watt, I forget if it's 96 or 98, but whatever, call it 100 watt battery is $330, something like that today when I looked at it earlier on B&H. And then there are some budget brands that, yes, they can get down into the $200 range, but I don't know, they're probably fine, but do you want to risk the budget brands, right? So in a way, using this device to power your camera could actually be a lot cheaper when it comes to batteries, because if you've got a couple of these, one of these, when I'm running this camera recording, and I've also got the monitor going and it's recording as well, I get about an hour and a half of record time off of one of these batteries, which is all right, but not awesome, right? You're not going to go all day on just one of these. And these batteries are real easy to snap in and out, and as you can see, they've got fins to help keep them in place even if you're not filling all 6. And it will also accommodate the half-length batteries as well. So the 50 watt hour ones, again, they're 48 or whatever, but call them 50. And then it's got a really nice, because it's a Pelican case, it snaps shut and is really secure. Now, the Pelican 1150 is a airtight, watertight, etc., very rugged case. It should be obvious that with the modifications that Audioroot has made to this, that it is no longer watertight, because you've got vents for the and a fan and all sorts of stuff. Plus, you've got where they've screwed the stuff into the top and the bottom, right? Those, they haven't like epoxied them or any other kind of sealant. So don't go dunking this in water because it'll be bad. So let's go over what this has on it. So I'll try to bring this closer. Hopefully it'll focus and not glare too much. So right now I have it turned off. And one thing I should point out is even though it's turned off, it will slowly drain the batteries. So they recommend not leaving the batteries in the case for an extended period of time. I have done a test where I've had about 48 hours with the batteries sitting turned off, and they have all lost 1% of their charge in that time. So it's not going to drain them super quick. You could obviously leave it overnight or whatever. It's not going to be a big deal, but you don't want to leave it for multiple weeks with the batteries installed because they will drain. And these Audioroots, at least when they're not being drawn from, they will go into a deep sleep mode, and they lose very little charge when they're in the deep sleep mode, right? You can lose 1% and it takes, you know, a month and a half or something like that. They're really good at maintaining their you don't want to keep them at, you don't want to put them into storage at 100%, right? Because that's bad for lithiums. But, you know, they're at like 70, 80%, and you disconnect them, they're good for a while, right? Which, when you have too many of them, which arguably I do with having 5, it's handy that they survive charge. So at any rate, let's look at this again. We have the main out on a XLR4 port, and this is got all 4 wires connected. So you've got, just like with standard eSMART batteries, you've got both power and telemetry. So 1 and 4 are the power, and 2 and 3 are the telemetry. You have a DC in port, and this acts the same as the priority port on the eSMART Trio battery distributor. The one difference, though, is that there is no telemetry input on this. It's just power input. But if you plug in an external power source to this, then the unit will stop drawing from the batteries. And if you pull it out, it will immediately continue carrying the load via the batteries without interrupting any of your gear. And then this last port is the charger port. Well, multi-purpose, but its main purpose is to charge. So this has a built-in charger in it. It can charge 2 batteries at once, and it will sort of round robin. It'll do 5 minutes on one, and then 5 minutes on another, and so forth, right? So that it gradually brings them all up. And you can run it with just the charger, and it will actually also act as a priority input, so that it won't be drawing the batteries down when it's on this, but that only works if you're drawing less than 4 amps on the output. Now, in my case, I didn't buy the charger or the external, I didn't buy the charger or the external input AC adapter. I have a nice 4-bay charger for my Audioroot batteries that I've had for a long time, and at least for now, I'm happy to just take the batteries out, put them in my regular charger, and let them charge in that. So I can't tell you how loud this fan is because I've never used it. And you can see at the moment with the on-off switch over here that it's currently off, or yeah, now you can see that it's off. And if I turn it on, it'll take a moment, but there, it just refreshed the display. And you might have noticed, hey, that display is an e-ink display, which is really nice because it means that it doesn't really draw any power to maintain that e-ink display. You can force it to refresh at any time by hitting the refresh button. And then it'll also automatically update itself once every 5 minutes. If the power is off, it will not update the display, right? So it's, again, while it's off, it goes into a much lower power mode, but it is not, as said earlier, completely zero. On the display, you get a readout for the battery remaining for each of the 6 slots. You've got an overall, let's see if I can do this. You've got an overall percentage, right, average. You've got what the current draw is in amps. You've got an average of all of the battery temperatures. And so it's doing that by using the SMART bus to read the battery temperature of each of the batteries and then averaging them. And then you've got estimated runtime, which right now it's saying like 14 days, 26 hours, which 26 seems a little weird because there's 24 hours in a day, but whatever. And we'll plug some stuff into this in a moment, but that's sort of the overall display outputs. Then you, like say, you've got, when the only time the fan comes on is when charging. And then you've also got, as I said earlier, these air vents that are also related to the charger. And if we open it up, so Audioroot is always really good about labeling their stuff. So they've got actual pinouts labeled for each of the ports, right? So you can see that that charger port is actually a multi-thing. It could also be power out with data bus as well. There is a soft reset button for resetting the microcontroller in here. There's a legacy mode switch I'll talk about in a moment. And then the USB port, which unfortunately is not a USB-C, you know, and this is a fairly recent device, but oh well. But the only reason you'd ever use the USB port is to do a firmware update on it, and I don't believe they've actually released a firmware update as of this time. If we tilt it a little bit, you can see it's got the standard charger pins for an eSMART battery, and it's got a nice anodized aluminum tray for holding the batteries. And then in the top, you've got, again, metal with some rubber gaskets to help hold the battery. Actually, these actually even press in a bit. So this helps when you're using short batteries because they'll stick down and then prevent the battery from sliding out. But one thing I don't like is that they didn't give you any place to put battery caps, right? So if you're a little bit crazy like me, and when you take, you know, you've got an eSMART and it's not plugged into anything, you want to put the battery cap on to make sure no gunk gets into the connectors, then unfortunately you're going to have to carry the battery caps somewhere else because they don't include one. Now, I talked about that legacy switch. They say, you know, turn this on when connecting to some of our older devices, our being Audioroot. I've tested this with other devices too, like I've got here the Deity SPD-1. As far as I can tell, you would only ever use it in legacy mode. I don't know what works in the non-legacy mode, right? So in the legacy mode, they talk about it behaving as like it combines the batteries into one readout, and that's similar to what the eSMART Trio is doing. The eSMART Trio doesn't even have a switch for it. It just does that, right? And so you get percent remaining average across the battery inputs. You get the average temperature across all the batteries. When it comes to charge cycles, it appears to be that it takes the charge cycle of the most used battery and reports that to the device, and then also things like, you know, estimated runtime remaining, so forth. Same stats you get from the eSMART Trio, which is, again, when I say I think the eSMART Trio has probably a bunch of its roots in this device. I've tested it going, into this SPD-1, which we'll do in a moment here. It's going into the eSMART Trio. Even the eSMART Trio is like 2 months old, just released by Audioroot, same company. If you put this in the non-legacy mode, the eSMART Trio doesn't actually understand whatever the data is that it's sending on the SM bus when in non-legacy mode. Flip it into legacy and then it's happy, right? And then same thing going into the Scorpio. If it's on legacy mode, you get all the telemetry with an asterisk so that the hour time remaining seems to come out as zeros. I don't know why. I don't know if that's a bug on the, I think it's a bug maybe on the sound devices side, because like this Deity SPD-1, which obviously is neither vendor, does report the time remaining as well. So I'm thinking that's probably a bug on the sound devices side, but you know, it's easy enough to look at the display direct, so not super worried about it. All right, so what do I have here? So I have, first off, a cable that I had made by Gotham Sound. They're great for custom cables, by the way. I'm not affiliated or anything. I just have been really happy with them. They're really personable folks and they do good jobs, right? So this is a 10-foot XLR4 to TA4 for use with, you know, traditional sound bag distributor. I will plug this in to the distributor, and then I can plug it into the SPD-1. And again, like I say, I'm not using the eSMART Trio here because the eSMART Trio is actually down in the Scorpio bag to record this. But as you can see, hopefully, if it will, yeah, well, the white's a little blown out. Or the backlight's a little blown out. But it's reading the wattage, it's reading the percent remaining that's coming through. It is saying 0 hours here, mainly because it doesn't know how to display 45 days, I think. And then, although it's hard to see, you can see it's got the voltage at 15.32, 0.047 amps, 22.9 degrees Celsius, and cycle count, etc. Right? So using a cable like this, you know, which again, this was, I don't know, $70 or something, I think. I forget exactly what I paid Gotham for it. This cable is carrying power and telemetry, and it'll work with your battery distributor. So if you've got a sound cart, you got a bunch of stuff on it, you've got your mixer, you've got a bunch of wireless receivers, maybe your ComTech, whatever, doesn't matter. You got all of that on your distributor. Feed this into your distributor, and then, you know, right now, of course, there's really no load on this, but it's saying 17.5 days with just this turned on at the moment. And, you know, my guess is, like I say, given that I get about 8.5 hours with 2 of these batteries in the Scorpio, you know, you would have basically 24 hours using 6 batteries in the distributor. And so I'm going to disconnect this for a moment. And then, as I was talking about earlier, you know, you can mostly use this in effect as a block battery for a camera, right? So I have here a cable. This is made by Mutiny, who does a lot of custom gear and whatnot for cinema cameras and so forth. This is an XLR4 to LEMO 6-pin. And that is what a lot of the cameras, especially red cameras, take, right? So if you give me a moment. That's a red Komodo, the original, right? And so it does not take that 6-pin directly. The newer Komodo X, as well as the V-Raptor, they do take that 6-pin direct, as well as a bunch of the older red DSMC2 stuff. What I happen to have here is a Jetpack EVO from Core SWX. And this is a kind of handy little device in that it is meant to facilitate hot swapping your batteries. So snaps on, as you saw. It has in it a small battery, and that is actually field serviceable. So when the battery eventually runs out of, capacity, cycles, whatever you want to call it, you can swap the battery out without having to e-waste the whole thing, which is nice. And then you put, your real onboard battery on it as well. And now it'll power the camera and whatever else is downstream on the camera. And then when you're swapping the batteries, it gives you up to 2 minutes of runtime at full load, which for them is 15 amps. So 15 amps and then most people will never hit that, but 15 amps for 2 minutes. So you got plenty of time to swap the battery. But then the other thing they do is you can get these it's very difficult now but they have these expansion modules. So comes without this. You have just a faceplate here that you undo these 3 screws, and now you can swap out and put on one of these modules. And the modules come in several different versions. This one has a pair of 2-pin LEMOs at unregulated, so 14.4. You have a 24-volt 3-pin LEMO in Fisher style. You have another, USB. So this is 5 volts, 2 amps, I believe they allow. And then the most important thing is it's got the 6-pin DC in. And so you can run this device from external power. So if you give me a moment, I will connect this to the output on the BC1150. And again, this works because gold mount batteries, etc., same power and voltage as traditional camera batteries. And so if I then plug this in. Now, another nice thing with this, you can see that it's powered up. With this particular cable from Mutiny, it's got the adjustable, so you undo the screw and then you can change the angle at 45 degrees increments and then screw it back down to hold it in place, right? And so I have this at a slight angle out because when it goes straight down, setting the Komodo on a table, the cable will end up bumping into the table. So this gives it a little bit of space so that it's not causing it to try to do a hard angle on the cable, which wouldn't be good for it. And so I can plug this back onto the camera. I don't know if you can see it. The red light for the SDI splitter, the Freak Show HD, comes on. And right now, if I hit refresh, we can see it's using 0.36 amps, 32 hours. And then if I actually turn the camera on, and I'll turn on the monitor. And as I said, this will only auto refresh itself once every 5 minutes, but you can hit the refresh button to manually update it. Now you can see we're using about 3.1 amps, 0.76, hit refresh again, 3.1. And so with these 3 batteries in it, which again are not fully charged, saying about almost 4 hours. That is, if you put all 6 batteries in it, now you've got almost 8 hours, 7.5, 8 hours. And this is also nice because, I've got the Bebob gold mount adapter, I think they call it the COCO-MODO, slots into the BP slots. It does not actually provide power through them. Instead, it's a output cable on the bottom that plugs into the DC in on the Komodo. And it's actually got the same 2-pin LEMO input that the Komodo power cable uses. The problem with this one is it's only rated for 3 amps. And as you can see, with just the camera and the monitor on, and I don't even have a focus motor or anything on here at the moment, right? It's using like 3.1 amps. And when it's recording, it tends to be more like 3.5, 3 3/4 amps, right? So now you're really starting to say, okay, I'm continuously a decent bit above the 3 amps that this port is rated for. And so that's another advantage to using this Jetpack with the additional module to allow the 6-pin LEMO in, because that supports up to 15 amps safely, continuous. Oh, I didn't say before, the problem with those expansion modules is they're really hard to find now because of all the supply chain problems. One of the components, apparently, I got this from their online chat with customer support. One of the components that's used to make those expansion modules is now, it's been unavailable for a long time. They have not redesigned the module around a new part. That part is used for all 4 of the different expansion modules they offer. I was originally trying to find the one that had 3 of the 2-pin outputs and couldn't find it. Nobody had it in stock. And now, I managed to find one company, CVP. So I had to actually, even though it's US company, had to basically order it from England back to the US because nobody that I could find in the US actually had any of those modules still in stock. So while it's a really fantastic device, it's also unfortunately not easy to come by at this point. At any rate, as I said, we'll look at the eSMART, the Audioroot BC1150 Battery Combiner. Hope this was helpful. If you've got any questions, please let me know, and I will try to get back to you as soon as possible. Thank you. Cheers.